have on the panel Mr. Ujjwal Kumar, Associate Director, Cuts International, Nicolo Zingales, FGV, Brazil, and Mr. Rahul Rai, Partner, Axiom 5 Law Chambers. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to all our panelists who are here physically and who are joining us virtually. I was just saying that we've got the worst time slot because it's not very easy to keep people awake after such a heavy lunch. But fortunately, we have a very interesting subject, which I guess will keep you awake. So what this session will cover the topic of responsible ICT and inclusive digital economy. There has been a paradigm shift in the way we do business. The brick and mortar is now moving towards a digital market and a digital economy. ICT is the backbone of this digital economy. Any regulatory and competition issues therein is also likely to affect dynamics of the emerging digital economy. There are regulatory and competition issues in telecom, new and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, cloud services, algorithms, just to mention a few, as well as with respect to digital platforms. Cybersecurity is another hot issue. So we'll first start with discussing telecom, cybersecurity, AI, and then we will move to regulation of digital platforms. So each panelist will have, let's say, 8 minutes to do justice to their subjects. I don't want to rush them, but please try to contain your presentation within that 8 minutes. That will be a first round. Then there will be a second round where each panelist will have 2 minutes to answer question, or if there is any comment that you would wish to make, either the panelists on what others have presented or from the audience. We'll do that in the second round. So I will first turn to Mr. Ujjwal Kumar, who is an assistant director with GUTS. By 2020, 5G has been implemented globally with features such as mass connection, extreme dependability, and guaranteed low latency specified. 5G, however, will fall short of meeting all future needs beyond 2030. 6G is expected to be rolled out from 2030 onwards. CUTS is implementing a project on ethical 6G, in which Ujjwal is also covering competition dimension. So, Ujjwal, what are such competition issues that you are covering in your research, and why should we start looking at them now?
Thank you, Kiran. We are implementing a project called Ethical 6G with support from DFAT, Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australian government. And our partners in this project are Australian Risk Policy Analysis. Alan Asher is also involved in this project very closely. And another partner is the Technology Research Institute, Triple ITB, International Institute for Technology, Bangalore. So next slide, please. So what I'll take little time. My objective is to flag the things that are going to come and how complex it would be. So there is a preparedness on part of the Commission Authority. There are researches going on in the research institutions, and so that your thinking hat should be kind of on. Next slide, please. This project has 4 research components, basically. First, when we began last year, nothing was available on 6G literature. So we consulted some of the white papers by private companies, and we understood now what the shape of things is going to come. Second was to kind of strategic opportunities for in the 6G ecosystem between India and Australia. We have partnership, strategic partnership, including partnership on cyber and emerging technologies. The third was to understand the standard development process and what these two countries, India and Australia, can collaborate in shaping the standards of the 6G. And fourth was identifying critical elements of the ethical framework for a common understanding for implementation. So in ethical framework, we took 6 elements like privacy, cybersecurity, competition, consumer protection, and inclusive. How inclusive would be 6G and how sustainable would be 6G. So next slide, please. So within that competition, we have certain initial findings, and we find that there are very complex things that are going to come with for which we should be prepared for. Next slide, please. So let's understand what 6G would be. As per the vision developed and very recently adopted by ITU, 6G will be emerging, will have at least 6 components, which will immersive communication like 3D communications, hologram, and all. It will have a massive communication, machine to machine, like huge smart cities would be governed by, fueled by the 6G technology, 6G ecosystem. It will be hyper reliable and low latency communication, so that uses like robotic surgery can happen. So precise it would be. So first 3 parts are basically, I mean, looking forward from the 5G, it has come from 5G. But next 3 is a new thing that has come to the 6G vision. One is ubiquitous connectivity. That anywhere you go, you will have 6G. There will be a continuous connectivity to that. And here, I think the terrestrial telecom communication and satellite communication will fuse together, so that there is ubiquitous connectivity. And there will be integrated AI and command. So the AI we are experiencing at the moment largely on the digital platforms and apps, but it will be into the telecom networks as well. Then we have integrated sensing and communication, like machine to machine communications will happen without any interference of human being. So basically, Internet of Everything. The complexity arise from the telecom, cyber, and digital technology will intervene so closely that it will be very hard for the regulators to kind of decipher which to apply and where to apply. We are already seeing some trailer in 5G application of telecom regulation on OTTs, communications, and all. So that will multiply, magnify, such kind of issues will magnify. Then how will the use of AI in telecom networks will be seen? That will also be, and there will be massive use of cloud services. And many technologists are saying that it may be a very decentralized cloud services. In fact, data centers would be decentralized in nature. So you will find small data centers around so that it can latency is less. So we have been seeing all this in isolation so far from the competition perspective. The complexity will arise when we see how we'll interact together as an ecosystem. That will be the complexity, and here we should be prepared for. So I'll just flag some of the potential competition. So there is no real at this moment. So we have a highly concentrated telecom sector almost everywhere. 2-3 players are there. We have a concentrated digital market platform. Cloud service market is also concentrated. And there is an increasing trend of vertical integration. So the ground is very fertile for what we can say for anti-competitive behavior, anti-competitive effects for 6G. And there can be views of dominance by the incumbents that we have to meet entry barrier. What kind of dominance and what kind of abuse? I think there may be new shape and new thought process may be coming into, because it is likely to be very vertically integrated. Net neutrality will play a very important role from competition perspective, both for upstream markets and downstream markets. We are in India, and I think elsewhere also, we are witnessing the debate on net neutrality. In 5G, there is a debate of spectrum slicing, whether for certain kind of activities like, say, we need less bandwidth for Netflix or Amazon Prime, but we may require more bandwidth for say automatic vehicles. So should that slicing be permitted for those? And would that violate net neutrality? Is an issue that is being discussed, and it's still not very certainly we said that that issue has been solved. Government is saying that such kind of slicing will not violate net neutrality. I mean, it's understandable that if certain sector needs more bandwidth, that should be done. But within that sector, there should not be discrimination between firms as such. That would perhaps breach the net neutrality. But as far as the use cases are concerned, I think net neutrality can be allowed, because use cases is the one where telecom industry, particularly in India, which is bleeding, will recoup their investments for 5G. So if we do not allow slicing for use cases, specific use cases, it may be, kind of, we are hurting the telecom sector itself, which is backbone for digital platforms ride on telecom sector. SCP FRAND. SCP is essential standard essential patent, and FRAND is fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory use of that. That is it has been an issue in telecom sector. We have witnessed lots of issues. There have been jurisdiction issues as well, whether Competition Commission has jurisdiction or whether Patent Authority has jurisdiction. Initially, it was said by Delhi High Court that Competition Commission has jurisdiction because it has a competition angle, while Patent Authority also has, because that the orientations are different. But the latest judgment saying that no, only Patent Authority will have kind of jurisdiction. Perhaps it will be settled in Supreme Court sometime in future. So this is an issue, and this is a strategic issue for as well for companies, and I think countries are also doing their own strategy about SAP FRAND. EU perhaps is looking to change some part of its strategy, and which is becoming controversial within the kind of perhaps a financial committee of European Parliament is perhaps objecting to such. So I mean, from Indian perspective, India's vision is that we should make as much indigenize 6G as much as possible. We should make network equipments in India. We should have our own networks. We should not be reliant on much, and we should develop more standards. So from that perspective, every country should have its own SAP and FRAND strategy, I suppose. And since it depends, I mean, it has a very strong competition angle. So this will be an issue tomorrow. So let's be prepared for that. Competition issues vis-a-vis cloud services, developed countries have started looking into. I think developing countries is still to look into such competition issues vis-a-vis cloud services. AI-related competition issues are also surfacing from biasness and others. I can also flag that geopolitics, which kind of reduces choice for network equipments, and can also reduce competition in that sense. So geopolitical nature is seen from national security angle, and the interpretation of national security is wide and very arbitrary. If I don't like you, I won't buy you. I can just use my national security clause. It will be WTO compatible. It will be things like that. So I think some certainty on that is needed. Otherwise, that competition may suffer. There may be technical expertise shortage. I mean, there are already technical expertise shortage, and so it will be hard to find skilled people to work in a firm to be competitive. A strong competitor may, kind of imply all the skilled people, even if they do not use it, so that the competitor may not have that skills in their domain. Access to capital can be another issue which can reduce competition. Next slide, please. In cloud services, I'm just focusing on some of the issues that is going on around. Please talk about big three, Amazon's AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google are the main cloud service providers. and there are a few others like Alibaba, IBM, Salesforce, Oracle, and Tencent. It has been observed that there are kind of restrictive licensing agreements between the cloud service providers and the users, particularly MSMEs and the corporate users. They tend to lock their customers. So that need to be that will be one of the issues in 6G, maybe in 5G also. There is high egress fee. If I want to change my cloud service provider, it is very costly for me to change that. So there is if you want to exit, there will be well, there are technical restrictions on interoperability as well. If I uh, change my cloud service provider, it may not be interoperable with the kind of data that or the kind of arrangements, technological arrangements that. So there has been market studies by UK communication regulator Ofcom. French Competition Authority has also done a market study. Netherlands Competition Authority. There has been surveyed by Japan FTC and Korea FTC. Investigations have also been begun in US FTC, and UK has also begun some of the investigations in cloud, and EU DG Comp has also begun investigations. So I think from the developing country perspective, the preparedness part, the competition authority, the academic people all have to invest, I think would be useful to make 6G more competitive than we have so far in the telecom sector, or the telecom and digital combined together. AI and competition, of course, concentration in AI foundational model. You say the UK Competition Authority is studying AI foundational model and has released a very initial report, and some of the things are kind of requires more in-depth research by authorities and by academics. Collusion is one we have been studying, algorithm collusions, algorithm biasness and all. It's hard to detect. I think the Russian FAS has developed toolkits, technological toolkits. Perhaps Brazilian cadres also develop a toolkits. The technology will find whether there is a collusion between two algorithms. I think such technological solutions are required by the competition authorities around the world. So maybe it's good to build capacity on that. There will be a use of dominance because the foundational model provide. I mean, are very few. MA and further consolidation. AI regulation has begun. China has very recently enforced AI regulation, which is one of the first leading countries too. There are, I think, couple of countries in Latin America which has regulation of AI. How much pro competition it is, so that need to be seen, so that it's less restrictive than what is required. Then IP regulation may also apply to AI, particularly for the training data. To train AI, you require us. That is where most of the high-end data where you train AI basically are IP protected. So in order to have more competition market, more trainings of different AI developers need to be done. And how IP regulation will be restrictive in that sense will need to be seen. And there are, of course, technological solutions as well, which competition authorities or academics would encourage in the market, like open model safety and security. I mean, uh, open model AI, but you have to, kind of be convinced that it has interface of safety and security from angle. More open you are, more vulnerable it would be from the security perspective. So that will next slide, please. Just few suggestions that ex post competition enforcement may not be adequate. Some ex ante policy approach, at least market studies, competition advocacy should begin in that sense. And here comes the role of academics and the authorities which have the resources to produce market studies on this system. Of course, BRICS Center can also have the digital study part 2. We already had one part 1 to look into the 6G ecosystem where you can deal with AI, clouds, and telecom technology together. And engagement with intergovernmental organizations like OECD, UNCTAD, WIPO, ITU will be useful. We should promote kind of open pro-competition technologies like Open RAN, which is being talked about. Interoperability is another angle that should happen from the technological perspective. I think every other issues like sustainability, security, uh, uh, privacy, consumer protection are in the vision of 6G. What is missing is the competition vision. I mean, whether 6G will be competitive, it is missing in the vision. Perhaps at the intergovernmental level, we should see that if it comes as a, if not vision, but in the outer circle somewhere competition features. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ujjwal. I will now turn to, I'm not summarizing it because I would let, there won't be enough time for the other speakers because we've got a panel of 10 speakers. So I will now turn to Greg Austin, co-founder, Social Cyber Group Australia, who is with us virtually. I saw him earlier. I hope he's still there. After some major cyber attacks like those on Optus and Medibank, there were major policy criticism about the effectiveness of the Australian cybersecurity, and there was also a major class action lawsuit against Optus. So much so that the Australian cybersecurity minister admitted that the country was a decade behind other developed countries on cybersecurity and data privacy. Australia has overhauled its cybersecurity regime recently. Please tell us briefly about the new regime and what lessons are there for other countries, particularly developing countries.
Well, thank you, Kieran, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you. So I've set my stopwatch, so hopefully I'll stick to 8 minutes. I wanted to make some broad overarching comments and relate them back to the Australian scene. So Kieran's quite correct that the current state of cybersecurity in Australia doesn't quite measure up to our economic potential, scientific and technical potential. The minister responsible has described the country as being in a cyber slumber. We've had innovative governmental cybersecurity policies announced several times since 2016, but we haven't quite delivered. The challenge for Australia is, as a capitalist economy, relatively wealthy country, it hasn't had to work too hard to achieve some sort of digital development. It's more or less come as part of the territory of being a relatively wealthy, developed country. And it's quite a contrast, really, with the imagination you see being applied in some developing countries, like Nigeria, for example, the energy that's being brought to bear by particular governments in the developing economies. Australia's been catching up, basically, with cybersecurity, and it's certainly been catching up with the potential of the digital economy. And as a quick, perhaps political observation, let me just say that capitalism and the concept of an inclusive digital economy are probably contradictions in terms. So we have to work very hard, in a sense, to make sure that we get around the intricacies and realities of a capitalist system to make sure that we develop inclusive approaches to ICT. In the case of Australia, for example, we've got remote communities who are quite disadvantaged, and we've got even more remote Indigenous communities which are even more disadvantaged in terms of the ICT sector. And we've got a burgeoning urban lower class who's increasingly distanced from access to the right digital technologies for their daily life. I've been working with the International Institute for Strategic Studies. We've recently completed the final 10 out of 25 country studies looking at their cyber capabilities and national power. It's been an interesting mix of first world countries, developing countries, as I said, 25 countries. And the last round we did in Nigeria, South Africa, and Brazil. And it gave us really good insight into the relationship between effective leadership, priority setting in government, and what's needed. Relating that back to the Australian case, Australia, like a large number of countries, is reacting radically to the events in Ukraine, the cyber war in Ukraine. Not every country in the world is doing that, but certainly European countries and countries aligned closely with the United States are doing radical things in cyberspace. Canada is perhaps an exception in that regard. Australia, however, in May 2022, published a plan called Red Spice, under which we intend to employ another 1,900 cybersecurity specialists or support personnel over a decade. We plan to increase our offensive cyber capability by a factor of 3, and so on. It's a radical plan. It was under development before the Ukraine invasion, especially under the influence of activities in the Asia-Pacific region, but also under pressure from activities conducted by Russia and other governments. So Australia was moving rapidly, enhancing its cybersecurity capability, not with full effect in the civil sector. It's pretty obvious from the cases that Kiran cited. But what that reveals in the Australian case is a heavy influence of the intelligence community. So not only are we a capitalist economy, which is not unusual and not necessarily that negative in many respects, but the cybersecurity policy has in Australia been heavily dominated by the intelligence community, particularly the Australian Signals Directorate, and less influenced by the private sector and by the needs of development in the digital economy. That's changing. And one of the challenges that Australia has faced in this period of since 2016, when we became more serious about cybersecurity, one of the challenges we've faced is how should the government set priorities. And in announcing their latest cybersecurity review, the Australian government called for advice on how to evaluate previous initiatives in cybersecurity policy. And that's really been a missing link in Australian policy. And that is the ability to understand what programs have worked, what programs have failed, and what are the causes of success or failure. So the Social Cyber Group did a submission to the group undertaking the new cybersecurity policy development on how to set up an evaluation system, and we hope that that has some influence. I'm not optimistic, because in a sense, evaluation is not fully developed as a what you might call good practice in the security departments of the Australian government. It is a well-followed practice and well-established practice in the economic policy departments of the Australian government. And it's something important for Australia and other governments. So what are a couple of lessons from the Ukraine war and what we've learned from these 25 countries? What we have learned is the contrast between the push for indigenous capability and self-reliance and the absolute necessity of international relationships and alliances. The Ukraine war teaches us overwhelmingly that states who want good national cybersecurity have to have solid, effective, and expanding international cybersecurity relationships. In that regard, it's good to see the Australian government doing what it's doing with the Indian government and Indian partners. But there needs to be also a mind shift, in a sense, which recognises very strongly the urge in all countries to maintain a degree of self-reliance while expanding their international cooperation. I think there also has to be a shift in the mindset away from the old development cooperation approach to these programs, away from capacity building to disposition to be ready to deliver mutual assistance in the event of a crisis. Most countries would appreciate and need mutual assistance in the event of a crisis, regardless of whether they're developing countries, wealthy or poor. And that really has to be a norm and a policy priority in a way that it hasn't been to date. Kieran, let me stop there. I've just put on the table some general propositions to sort of, in a sense, stimulate some thought about what's the relationship between cybersecurity, different types of economies, and the final objective, in a sense, of an inclusive digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. That's very interesting. Hopefully, in the second part, you'll have the opportunity to add whatever you have not been able to speak about in this first part, and answer questions from the audience or other panelists. So we will now hear from Mr. Deepak Maheshwari, who is a senior visiting fellow, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. Telecom and digital technologies are fast converging with the advent of 6G. Both sets of technologies are likely to be bundled so intricately that it may be hard to separate the two threads. What, according to you, are the regulatory challenges arising from such convergences, and what are the solutions that you offer?
Thank you, Kiran. And as Ujjwal has already sort of laid out in terms of 6G, some of the issues, etc. So first thing, let me just start with a paradox or maybe an oxymoron that he used. He said data centers are going to be decentralized. So, I mean, you're talking of centralization center as well as decentralization together. And I think that is the type of paradox that we are going to have to face more and more often when we come to these issues related to telecom and convergence in terms of, let's say, applications or services that are riding on it. Now, essentially, I mean, forget about the 7-layer OSI interconnection network. But even if we just look at the 3 basic layers, so there's a physical layer, which could be wired or wireless. It could, of course, include the submarine cable, satellite links, etc. Then you have, on top of that, another layer, which is in terms of data layer. And then you have, of course, the application and services. I'm not even getting into the multiple layers beyond that. Now, the fact is that none of these will work unless you have the underlying network itself there. And as he just mentioned, that underlying network is absolutely necessary for anything else to ride over it. So you can have roads, but may not be cars. But it would be difficult to drive a car without a road. Of course, I mean, in many parts of the world, including in India, in some places, yes, it does happen that you may have people off-roading in that sense, or there may be little patches of roads while you're driving. Now, leave aside that. What's happening is in terms of the response from the policy makers and from the institutions and instruments. So in any democratic system, we have institutions, that is the bodies that do a certain function. And then, of course, there are instruments. So which could be laws, policies, regulations, etc., which is what is being used to give effect to whatever these institutions are supposed to work. However, any institution is set up at a certain point of time and context. And so are the promulgations and development of any policies and regulations. So, I mean, for example, in India, there's often people do joke that, yes, I mean, Indian Telecom continues to work on Indian Telegraph Act, which was only 138 years and 10 days old, because it came into effect on 1st of October 1885. But let's also not forget that even our Indian Evidence Act is even older, 1872. Indian Contract Act is also 1872. So just because something is old doesn't mean that it won't work. And the other important thing is this, that most of the new services that came into, at least in India, in terms of telecom services, they did not came in 2000. They did not came in 2020s. They did not came in 2010s. They actually were introduced in the 1990s. And these included internet services. These included VSAT, paging, mobile, PMRTS, many other services. And we never had to revisit even the definition of the word telegraph used in 1885. In fact, I would say that some of the brilliant lawyers in this room and elsewhere, that they might even argue that even telepathy needs a telecom license, because after all, it uses the Hudson waves. So, because the definition is so broad and wide and comprehensive in that sense, that you don't have to revisit that definition. At the same time, the norms are changing. The technology has been changing. So what's happened is that we have seen that there's a convergence, at least as far as consumers are concerned. On the same device, you can get internet services. On the same device, you can watch TV or listen to FM radio, things like that. You can, of course, do IT, and one can also use the just simple voice call or video call on those things also. So as far as consumers are concerned, yes, there's a convergence which is happening. But are the institutions really geared up? Probably not. For example, in India, we have a Ministry of Communications that does the telecom and post. We have a Ministry of Electronics and IT that does the information technology, electronics manufacturing, etc., including, of course, data protection, the law that got passed a couple of months back. Then we have also got Ministry of Information and Broadcasting that does the dissemination of public information from the government side, including government press releases, etc., but also all the radio and the public broadcasting in terms of radio and television. Now, if I look at the regulatory system, we have TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, that became effective in 1997. Few years later, on 9th of January 2004, the government just issued a simple notification, and they said that, okay, broadcasting will also be defined in such and such manner. The Telegraph Act actually says that broadcasting is outside the ambit of Telegraph Act, but the TRA Act allows the government to notify certain things, and that's what they use. And they said, okay, broadcasting is also a telecom service, and hence it will be covered by them. Fair enough. A couple of months back, we have the Data Protection Act, and although TRA is not going to look at data protection directly, but the appellate of TRA, which is the Telecom Dispute Settlement and Appellate Tribunal, that's going to be also the appellate body for the data protection, but not the regulatory body as such. So that's going to be different. So we already have a situation that we have 3 different ministries doing these different functions. We have one common regulator at this point of time. Of course, there's going to be other regulator. For example, Data Protection Board of India is going to come up. There's already a National Cybersecurity Coordinator office in the Prime Minister's office. There's already a CERT-in, which is under the Ministry of Electronics and IT. There's a Controller Certifying Authority, another statutory body under the Ministry of IT. So there are multiple of these things already there. We also had the National Cybersecurity Policy, which was announced on 3rd of July 2013. It's run its course effectively in about 5 years. And it's been more than 3 years since we have been waiting for the national cybersecurity strategy. There have been discussions, there have been consultations, but we are yet to see what shape it's going to take place. There's also on 21st April 2022, the government came up with the draft telecom bill 2022, where again the definition of telecom is so wide that it actually includes things like data centers, cloud computing, OTT services, etc. within that ambit. But we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the next step there. So we have telecom law, we have broadcasting law, we have Data Protection Act, we have Information Technology Act, which is also supposed to be replaced by something called Digital India Act in a few months or years' time. I don't know when. And at the same time, cybersecurity policy is still something which is, I'll say, cybersecurity strategy is something MS at this point of time, a framework for sharing of non-personal data. Personal data is covered already under the new law, but non-personal data, again, something is yet to come up on that. Again, there have been multiple iterations on that. And the third thing which is missing big time is coordination across all these things. So what we do have is, yes, there are different ministries, there are different regulators, appellate tribunals, etc. But we still do not have any clear-cut mechanism to coordinate all these things. And that's where the real dilemma is. So currently the situation is that TRA can look into certain issues. Of course, Supreme Court has held in certain matters that, okay, what is the ambit of the Competition Commission of India and what is the ambit of sectoral regulators like TRAI and others in their respective sectors. But beyond that, the real issue is coming when you have a telecom company bundling in certain OTT services as part of its telecom tariff. On the other hand, you also have a situation that the so-called OTT companies, or let's say the major cloud service providers globally or in India, they are also not just creating data centers, but they are actually engaging in building the telecom infrastructure. For example, of course, not within India so much, but perhaps globally. So they are part of the consortiums laying new submarine cables, things like that. So these are the places where you have to look at competition at three different levels. One is competition overall within the digital market, and whatever way the digital markets are defined by the respective authorities. Second is the competition within the carriage part, which is just the telecom network. So whether you're talking about 5G, 6G, submarine cable, etc., all of these things, or satellite. And the third is in terms of the competition on top of the services and applications that ride over these networks. So whether you are talking about social media, whether you are talking about news or entertainment or anything like that. So unless there's a clarity in terms of what is the level at which you want to do these regulations in terms of ensuring competition, it's really difficult to come out with any prescription there. And hence, what happens is that any institution is actually becomes almost, I'll say, they become prisoners of their own privileges and the processes. And then whatever they have, those privileges and processes, they try to sort of apply the same thing everywhere. So it's just like the old saying that a person with a hammer, to that person, everything looks like a nail. And I think, unfortunately, that's what most of the regulators often actually tend to do these things, either consciously or unconsciously for that matter. The second thing is there's also a capture not only by the market players of the regulatory captures, and that's something on which the literature does deal a lot, but I would say there's also a capture by the regulators on the different markets. So, for example, a particular regulator might actually try to look at a broader ambit beyond what its law or statute or anything allows it, and they may try to dabble into many of the other things. And sometimes it may be so much that they may actually derail from their core purpose for their core mission. And I think those are the places where we need much better safeguards. So what is happening is you have got multiple tracks going on. Some of those tracks are overlapping, like on a railway tracks you see. Some of those will run in parallel. But yes, inevitably there'll be some places where they will sort of cross over. And wherever so most of the accidents actually do not happen just on parallel tracks. They actually happen at these crossings. And that's where we need to ensure that we have proper safeguards, we have proper signaling, we have also multiple levels of these protection, which is not just at one place or only with one person, but also something which goes through multiple levels. And last but not the least, we also need a proper coordination mechanism. So, for example, in India, I think it would be useful to have some sort of coordination mechanism under the Prime Minister's office or under Niti Aayog to ensure that all these things are, who does what, and in case there's a difference of opinion, how do you resolve those issues? So, for example, if you see Ofcom in UK, yes, in 2002, it sort of subsumed 5 erstwhile regulators. Then in 2010, it got additional powers. In between, it got some of the powers were depleted, then were added. And of course, recent addition is the Online Safety Act, just a few weeks back. MCMC in Malaysia is another example. FCC in the US is another example. So different countries and different jurisdictions have addressed these issues in different ways. But in India, I think at least what I'm seeing is that we are not changing the basic institutional infrastructure, and we are just trying to overlay on top of that these type of things. So with that, I would just like to close at this point of time, and later, if there are any questions, thank you.
Thank you, Deepak Maheshwari. That is very interesting because we're speaking of convergence of telecom and digital technologies, while convergence among the different regulators is missing. Okay. We have Jia Kai, leading research fellow, BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center and associate professor, University of Electronic Science and Technology, China, who hopefully is with us virtually. Are you there?
Yeah, hi, Karen, can you hear me?
Okay, so policymakers, researchers, and leading tech executives are calling for government regulations to mitigate the negative aspects of AI. While AI is sure to provide many benefits, the potential risk and harms are also the focus of current debate. over the purpose and scope of forthcoming legislation. China is one of the major jurisdictions to enforce AI regulation. Can you please enlighten us on the contours of Chinese AI regulation? Are there any teething problems in its implementation? Has any pro-competition or restrictive effect been observed or anticipated from this regulation? To you, Jiakai.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you, Director Duran. So thank you for inviting me here, and I also saw the colleague of Nicola, and so it's nice to be here. I know that there are two rounds of our discussion. So for the first round, I want to briefly introduce what is happening in China about AI governance. Actually, it's just a brief introduction. So I want to first need to say some about the timeline or the milestones of Chinese approach to the AI governance. So as you can see, it seems has already been comprehensive and covering different fields to regulate or.
Jia, excuse me. Can you put it on full screen? I think it's not possible for any of us to read the slides, or magnify.
Okay. So let me tweet and.
Yeah, we can see you on full screen, not your slides.
Oh, you cannot see the slides, right?
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me share it again. So is it okay, Karni?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, that's better. Okay, no problem. So about the milestone of Chinese approach to AI governance, actually, if we briefly speaking, that it starts ever since 2017. That is, you can say a development plan or the roadmap is issued by the State Council. And following that, there are four. Actually, in this roadmap, it has already been written that that China will do four kinds of things to regulate AI. The first thing is to establish some agency, but initially it's just some committee or some ASIC committee. They are not issuing bounding rules, but currently there are some new agencies established. For example, the National Data Bureau. It's a newly built agency, but and this newly built agency can have can issue some bounding rules. But if we go back to 2019, it's just some professional committee. But the professional committee will they have issued some ethical codes or principles, but that is a starting point. And following after 2019, that you can see in different fields, including the Ministry of Science and Technology or the Cyberspace Agency, and different agencies in vertical fields, they have also issued some different AI related policies in each field. After 2022, there are some laws issued, especially mainly by the Cyberspace Administration of China. So many focus on focusing on the recommendation algorithms or the generative AI, that ChatGPT and its most recent development. And also in 2022, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have also issued some rules on the it's not rules on the initiatives on global governance. So this is for my understanding, this is a brief milestone of Chinese approach to. So you can say it's step by step. But to make it in more details, that also there are different kinds of initiatives on the projects. For example, one of the most important thing is that the Ministry of Science and Technology has already started some so-called AI policy experiments and AI social impact experiments across the whole country. So it means that in different provinces that they have already started the AI social, for example, the AI social impact experiments. They are trying to measure. They are trying to measure the impact of the AI implementations and how the public is responding, and what is the policy preference of the public. So So this is one of some specific initiatives and projects. And besides that, as I mentioned in the beginning, that there are gradually different government agencies have already established it. On the top level is, for example, there are some general science and technology ethics committee, but in 2019 there are also AI ethics committee focused on AI. But these two kinds of agency can be considered as a soft regulation or soft agency. But ever since 2022, the cyberspace administration of China, it has already turned itself into a regulatory agency. They have issued laws on recognition algorithms, on deepfake, on generative AI. So it has at present they can be considered as regulators. But also for the companies, they have also established their self-governance agencies. And this is 8 principles issued by the professional committee that and we can say it's the concept is responsible AI, and the 8 principles cover 3 different kinds of fields. On the risk control, on the development, and also on the how the government system shall be established. So, and also following this the overall picture, I want to explain 2 examples. The first 2 examples of how the AI is governed, or what it would be considered as an innovative mechanism. So, for example, the governance of the algorithms. So algorithms is the core of the AI, and how to regulate algorithms is also a problem, and is also a challenging problem. So, and they have already established this, so the governance algorithm by fields. So in different, you can say in different industries, you have different regulations, and also there are some governance tools innovation. For example, the algorithm recording system. So the algorithm recording system is trying to require the companies to report what kind of algorithms they are using. And so this is a timeline of this system. And they are required to report the name of algorithms, the logic, how the algorithms is designed, what kinds of data they are using, and what is the potential risks, and what are the preventive measures they are taking to control these risks. So for this kind of system is one of the first algorithm recording system all over the world, and it seems that it can help improve the transparency of the algorithm. But there are still some problems, or there's some questions and challenges. So for example, if we relate it to the competition authority, what kinds of this so what kinds of this system can benefit the competition authority? If we want to understand whether there is a algorithm condoning phenomenon for this company, how can we find that? How can we confirm that? So at present, CAC and SAMA hasn't cooperate with each other to figure out how the algorithm recording system can help the investigation of antitrust or of the competition authority. But it seems that principally they can play an important role into enforce, for example, competition or antitrust investigation in the digital area. And another typical case is about the generative AI. So for most for my understanding, this is a quick response to the ChatGPT, or to the new, we can say, the generative AI compared with before technology, the technology before. And they are also using the policy tools that I mentioned just now, the algorithm recording requirements. And you have to distinguish the service from technology. You distinguish from public service from non-profit services. So this is a new start of new start of how we can regulate the emerging technologies, and how can we deal with these technologies to satisfy the public goals. So this is what I want to show. So maybe because of the limited time, that we can have a more deeper discussion later. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's very, very interesting and lots of lessons to be learned from there. We'll be happy to hear more from you in the second part of the presentation. Digital monopolies create new challenges for regulators and antitrust authorities. Breaking up tech monopolies will not be easy. The Russian Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has been innovating with respect to dealing with digital competition issues, including algorithmic cartels. Andre, what lessons, according to you, that other countries can learn from the way FAS has been regulating digital economies in Russia?
Thank you for your question. I'm very happy to be here and share our Russian experience in digital markets regulations and struggle against digital monopolies. I could mention at least 5 lessons learned. First one is adaptation of legislation to new conditions of digital economy and of digital world. Second is strong and smart enforcement. Third is introduction of soft law mechanisms, self-regulation, and social responsibility principles, as well as competition compliance. Of course, international cooperation is extremely important because the digital world is a global one, and it's nothing to do with these digital monopolies on the local markets level. And of course, to understand the digital world, to introduce smart regulation and enforcement, it needs a huge work on capacity building and rising an expertise in the real situation on this very complex market. Talking about legislation, yes, just on the 1st of September this year, a new package of amendments to the competition law and law of administrative offenses have been enforced. This new legislation introduced definitions of network effect, of definition of digital platform. It used some quantitative and qualitative thresholds to define these platforms as dominant on the digital market, and talking about the decision-making process, the use of programs that allows decision-making to be made automatically. It's a definition of algorithms in Russian competition law, aimed on restriction on competition, now is aggravating circumstance when we calculate the amount of fines in cartel cases, especially in bid rigging cases. Talking about enforcement, yes, really, as you, Karan, just mentioned, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has a great experience in digital market cases, both regarding global players and Russian national fast-growing IT companies as well. So we use the principles of competitive neutrality in this area in very accurate way. Last 5, 6, or 7 years, our clients were all well-known digital corporations like Microsoft, Google, Apple, Booking.com, and so on and so forth. Yes, and what is very important that in these cases we try to deal with nearly all areas of harm that competition authority use in their case handling work on digital markets. It was tying and bundling. It was self-preference. It was the most favorite contract principles. It's access limitation. It's unjustified blocking of counterparts and so on and so forth. But we are active not only in tech companies sector, but in telecom sector itself, because as Pat mentioned, the network itself is a material basis of any digital market of any participants of this market. Mobile network operators in Russia work on the market principles. There are no regulated tariffs and fees. They are in strong competition because we have 4 national-wide telecom operators in our country, and they use very accurate methods of work, but nevertheless they're under our soft control because the price for communication telecom is very important for all our citizens. It's really a socially important market, and not only price but conditions of contracts as well. And just last example, in the beginning of September, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service issued a warning to 4 major Russian telecom operators, according to which they should cancel the fee for distribution of internet traffic from mobile devices. Of course, but many young people use this method of communication very often. And in case of failure to comply with our warning, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has the right to initiate the case of violation of competition law against these telecom operators. And one more very important thing. The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service nowadays also serve like a mediator in disputes between participants of digital markets. For instance, 1 or 2 years ago, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service conducted the investigation of action of Yandex. Yandex is the biggest Russian internet IT company. There are a set of claims from 8 different groups of users of Yandex services and products: hotel booking, ticketing services, cinemas, trade platforms, even football fans club. And Yandex, yes, Yandex was found guilty for manipulating social rights as usual and giving advantages to its own digital services. But in the results of this very long and complicated communication between FAS, Yandex, and all these groups of applicants, we conclude a set of settlement agreements with of the participants of this case with support of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service. Moreover, the Yandex not only eliminate these anti-competitive practices of self-preference, but also took a commitment to develop and implement tools to ensure non-discriminatory access in future, and donate a great sum of money to a special non-profit fund of support of development of new digital services of its vendors. It's very important. The same situation was with Wildberry. Wildberry is the biggest Russian service of online shopping, and there were some conflicts between sellers, platform itself, distribution centers, and final buyers. And all these conflicts were settled in foreign in federal anti-monopoly service without initiating of case of violation of competition law. Talking about soft law, I'll be very short. Yes, it seems to Russian Competition Authority that that we need to find a balance between strong enforcement and self-regulation and soft law tools. For instance, together with the business operators, last year we've developed the document named Principles of Interaction of the Digital Market Participants. What is this? This is a sort of a framework of doing business for the biggest Russian operators, and all major IT companies joined these principles. It's more than 80% of Russian digital market in total. It's reasonable openness of platforms, neutrality of attitude to different sides of the market, including competitors. It's autonomy of platform users during interaction with the platforms. It's avoiding of difficult simulation of the rules, because in many cases the rules of communication with IT were so complicated. And it's ensuring of the rights of platform users, including by considering their appeals and providing them with complete answers. It's very important as well. And about international cooperation. Yes, I think that we now have the great opportunity to combine our intellectual resources on the base of BRICS countries, and the role of BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center is very important. And for instance, in the end of this week, we will discuss the second report on digital market, on competition on digital market, provided by the BRICS Working Group on Competition on Digital Markets. First one was very important, very interesting, and the results of this work are not only theoretical importance, but they realize in our practical life. For instance, model M&A waivers are adopted in the framework of Community of Independent States and BRICS as well. And in June of this year, the model principles and standards for the activities of participants in digital market were adopted on the level of Community of Independent States. And we are working on dissemination of these best practices in the format of BRICS and BRICS Plus. Very important thing, it's a final lesson learned, is the capacity building. For this, we have great opportunities as well. We have a learning and methodological center in the center of Russia, in Kazan city. And every year we organize a set of training sessions and seminars on the international basis. And next year, the learning program will be devoted to issues of anti-monopoly regulation in digital economy, because it's very important topic of discussion for experts from different countries that want to work together and to learn from each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andrei. That's really interesting. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you at the end of the session. We'll now move to Faruk Karabev, Deputy Chairman, Competition Promotion and Consumer Protection Committee of Uzbekistan. He is with us virtually. Faruk, what is the Uzbek Competition Authority's experience in regulating the digital space? A new competition law that has come into force a few days back. Are there any changes in the enforcement approach vis-a-vis digital platforms?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear participants of this very important event. I would like to greet you all on behalf of our Competition Promotion Committee of Uzbekistan. And I would like to briefly inform you what progress in terms of implementation of antitrust regulation towards digital markets we have implemented so far. So I would like to inform that this year was a very crucial year for legal framework for regulation of digital markets in Uzbekistan, because just recently on October 4th, new competition law has come in force. So and it's significantly changes the status quo of digital platforms in Uzbekistan, and for the biggest population nation in Central Asia, for us it's very important to see, to feel the pace of reforms and regulations, regulatory reform, which is ongoing among our partners and colleagues around the world. So we have introduced in a new competition law definition of digital platforms, and if I can share the screen, I can just so can you able to see this presentation?
Can you just put it on full screen, please? Yeah.
Just a moment.
Full slide. I mean, full slide.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So it's very what's going on in Uzbekistan for now is we have a very big digital agenda, digital transformation agenda in Uzbekistan. Parks, then creation of regulatory sandboxes to stimulate the digital economy, new business models, new fintech solutions, etc. So we have plenty of benefits and grants for easing doing business for digital companies. And we have our president initiated a very comprehensive digital Uzbekistan strategy until 2030, which will we will promote our deep digitalization and fully digitalization of public administration and national economy policy. So regarding the new competition law, so we have introduced a digital platform definition. Also, we have introduced the procedure of determining and recognizing the dominant position of digital platforms. And we have, of course, regulatory framework for digital platforms is a very comprehensive and complex issue. That's why in the law, we have just introduced a framework prohibition from taking actions that restricts competition by imposing several requirements on use of information technologies and digital products. So, now we are almost finished the procedure of detecting abuse of dominant position of digital platforms. And one more thing is that we have introduced in a law so-called superior bargaining position norms, which will help us to in an initial stage to implement so-called ex-ante regulation by introduction of framework prohibitions. And we determine scope of law on 20 types of digital platforms. We understand that there are plenty of types of digital platforms, and they will change very fast. But in the initial stage, because we need to gain experience, we need to gain skills, we need to gain an expertise that will help us to more accurately regulate the digital platforms and not squeezing the progress and innovation. That's why we are quite cautious about implementing directly some prohibitions. So as you can see, we have chosen 20 types of digital platforms on which we will apply the new competition law and secondary regulations. So we are now deciding the criteria of dominance according the size of our economy, according to various factors which of digital environment, let's say. So we choose now we propose digital platform to be presumed dominant if its sales on digital platform exceeds $3 million, or number of end users exceeds 50,000 monthly. As we have chosen the ex-ante regulation, as I have said, we will set a number of framework prohibitions. They are usual, and I think you are all aware of this main prohibitions because it's common. So, and just like I can send the presentation later to see the main prohibitions. But the main one line prohibition is set in the law, and this other exact behaviors and actions, anti-competitive actions, will be in the secondary legislation. So I would like to briefly inform about our digitalization of our everyday work. So we have developed a digital platform, FairTech, and we have fully integrated it with 15 state bodies and various databases to ease and to make more efficient our daily work and investigations, market analysis, and other our functions. So we have we can through this digital platform we can do our daily work without time-consuming I would say without time-consuming issues and yes, it's in a very initial stage in beta version, but still we have already felt the efficiency of this platform. So unfortunately, this is in Russian, but yeah, we have several non-traditional functions in our committee. For example, we monitor the daily on daily basis the prices for socially significant goods. We have monitoring the prices on marketplaces, and we are monitoring the commodities exchange prices for highly liquid products. And also we have monitoring the
Farooq, excuse me, can you just speed up a little bit? We have three more speakers after you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm done with the presentation. So this I would like to inform our colleagues, and we will happy to answer all questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farooq. You'll have the opportunity to answer question in the second part of the session. Now we turn to India again. The Competition Amendment Act 2023, recently voted in India, has introduced a new standalone threshold called the DVT, the deal value threshold. I will invite Rahul Rai, partner Axiom 5 Law Chambers, to share some insight as to how this new threshold will be implemented. And please also share with us some insights on competition issues arising from vertical integration or arrangements in digital markets.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I planned a startup line for starting my discussion, and earlier today I read the briefing note from CUTS, and the second paragraph talks about the idea behind this conference and how it was conceived. And the idea was that in developing countries, we have instances of regulatory failure, and they identify 4 types here. The regulatory failures that arise from under-regulation, over-regulation, poor design of regulations, and implementation. My topic gives me the opportunity to discuss each of these 4 aspects. The fear of under-regulation in the world of competition law is what guided perhaps Indian policymakers and legislators to introduce the deal value threshold. The current construct of merger control rules in India requires deals to be notified to the Competition Commission of India for their approval if the combined value of assets and turnover of the parties to the transaction exceeds certain thresholds. Policymakers fear that new age technology companies may not have sufficient assets or may not have sufficient turnover to trigger the traditional thresholds. And therefore, the idea that some deals could go undetected, some deals could slip under the radar, the Indian regulator would not get the opportunity to examine them ex ante, led perhaps to the introduction of the deal value thresholds. This is where, again, I mean, it's a, could the government of India, could the Indian policymakers have looked at actual empirical evidence of under-regulation? Could we have framed the threshold at a level which was either higher than 2,000 crores, which is roughly $250 million US, or lower than that? I'm not very sure if that actual empirical study was carried out, but let's move. Assuming that there is a sense of under-regulation, then this new amendment increases the prospect of over-regulation. Because what we are trying to catch here is a very small set of transactions which may potentially raise concerns. Germany, like India, but far ahead of India, introduced deal value thresholds. Austria introduced deal value thresholds. And the experience from Germany and Austria shows that a vast majority of transactions being notified under the deal value thresholds are not from the technology sector. They are actually from the real estate sector. And that possibility is very real in India. Why so? Because most real estate developers create multiple holding companies to house their assets. And each time that they develop a land parcel, they invite investments, they invite strategic partners. And if obviously those deals today don't get notified because there is no building up and about, there is no apartment complex, there is no shopping mall, and therefore there is no turnover. But tomorrow, investments in these shell companies which only hold land parcels at this moment, if the deal is valued $250 million, will require the CCI's approval, notification to the CCI. We would end up forcing notifications in a sector which raises no competition concern at all. Let's move from here to the third aspect, which is design deficiencies. The law is very clear. It says that transactions where the value of the transaction is above 2,000 crores Indian rupees, which translates to roughly $250 million, requires CCI's notification. But the parent legislation or the amendment to the legislation does not define what would comprise deal value, the methodology for computing the value of the transaction. And for these, the Competition Commission of India has issued draft regulations. They are up for consultation. There are two aspects that I wanted to highlight as examples of how the design of the regulation could again lead to regulatory failure. One of those aspects is a look-back provision. The regulation says that if the same acquirer or the acquirer group makes multiple investments in one target within a period of 2 years, then we will amalgamate the value of the transaction, each of those transactions. So if a fund invests $50 million in round one, tops up its investment by another $50 million in 6 months' time in round two, takes it up to another $100 million in round three, all within a span of 3 years, then the first two deals were not notified. But the third deal could end up notifying. Why? Because the regulation requires the parties to add up the value of all previous transactions undertaken in the past 2 years. There is a look forward provision which says that from the date of the transaction, if the parties to the transaction enter into any ancillary agreements for the next 2 years, then please attribute a value, a consideration to each of those ancillary agreements. And if the sum total of the value attributed to the ancillary agreements and the initial deal value exceeds $250 million, go and notify the transaction to the regulator. All of this comes from the fear of under-regulation. The fear of under-regulation is that in the technology sector, certain transactions don't get notified. The regulators fear that parties to the transaction to beat the notification requirement will split up the transaction into multiple transactions. The regulator fears that parties to the transaction will disassociate the primary equity investment from secondary but equally important strategic arrangements. And therefore, let's try and amalgamate all of them. Now, this is the design of the regulation, but this poses significant implementation hurdles. I'll give you one simple example. In the traditional merger control framework, the regulators typically start by identifying areas of overlap between the acquirer and the target. The overlap could be whether acquirer A makes the same products or services as the target B, or whether acquirer A makes something which could be used as an input in the product or service that the target fee offers. In the technology world, it's not necessary that today's acquirer buying investment in a target actually competes with the target. It's not necessary that they share a vertical relationship. But let's go back to the fear of under-regulation which informed this law. The idea was that some transactions slip through the radar, and they could be in the nature of killer acquisitions, that one acquirer today wants to acquire something so that it can kill that target. Now, that's the fear that the regulators are coming from. Practical challenge is that there are no overlap between the acquirers and the target on the day that a deal is notified. So what would the regulator examine the transaction for? What is the examination, the review framework that the regulator will deploy? And these are not easy questions to answer. And because they are such difficult questions to answer, and if the regulator is to do a good job, then potentially to identify that 1 in a million transaction, which could be in the nature of a killer acquisition, the regulator will have to probe deeper and deeper into each transaction. And what does that do? Implementation issue. The Indian law today says that if a deal is notified and 30 days lapse from the date of the notification, then the transaction shall be deemed to be approved. Now, the people who are responsible for implementation fear that deals slip through the cracks. They don't get notified. So they are not going to let the deemed approval kick in. They are going to ask more and more questions and therefore delay the 30-day period of deemed approval. What do we have in sum? We started by a fear of under-regulation. We will end up over-regulating some sectors which require no intervention by the regulator today. The regulations are designed in a way that we look back 2 years, we look forward to 2 years. There is significant degree of uncertainty. And when it comes down to actual implementation, we are going to be probing in the dark because it is very, very difficult to understand if an acquirer on day one, which is paying $250 million for a target, wants to actually kill that target. And to be able to spot that, the inquiry has to be nothing but, if I am to do a good job, then I need to look at a lot of information, ask for a lot of documents. That process takes time. And if that process takes time, and I apply that process to every transaction, then again, I have the problem of over-regulation, over-intervention. All in all, going back to what Kutz has rightly identified, regulatory failure because of under-regulation, over-regulation, poor design, and challenges to implementation. I'll stop here. Happy to answer any questions.
So I think we are running behind schedule. So I'll ask Nicolas Zingales, who is from FGV Direito Rio, Brazil. There are instances where platform service providers are also competitors of business suppliers on such platforms. Thus, the neutrality assumes importance from competition point of view. How to ensure platform neutrality? Do we need ex-ante approach in such dealings, or competition enforcement can suffice?
Move it up a little bit. First of all, I want to thank Kat and the BRICS Competition Center for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be in Delhi for the first time, and it's been a very interesting conference so far. I want to answer the question focusing on 4 points, so trying to be brief, directly to the point. The answer to the question is, do we need something else than the traditional competition framework? Yes, but maybe not necessarily the regulation that we see today being adopted and proposed all around the world. I think, first of all, we should not talk necessarily about platform in isolation from ecosystems. So there is this new term, this new approach. We are talking about the coexistence of multiple actors that are interested in shared value creation. And the platform is basically the catalyzer, the innovator that brings these actors together and that orchestrates the value creation. So gives rules, standards that allow this joint value production. I think that the reason that we have this new configuration is mainly due to three elements. We have interconnectedness of different markets and size of market. We have modularity, so the ability of putting together different pieces that form parts of a whole together. And we have network effects that are quite significant in these markets. So these network effects in particular lead to a situation that is called today the inverted firm. What does this mean? Traditionally, we are used to the activities being integrated inside the firm in order to minimize transaction costs that would have to be occurred if the firm had to contract out each of the requirements that it needs for its activities. Now, in the context of platform, with all these network effects, the firm realizes that it's more convenient to open up to third parties, and instead of integrating, it gets more value by inviting all this multitude of players. And at some point, it realizes that there are some segments in which it is convenient for it to eventually integrate. So this is where we could have some distortion, some discrimination. And I think here is where we can talk about, platform neutrality or some sort of non-discrimination principle. The orchestrator then of this value creation, the platform, can introduce a range of restrictions. It can lead to higher fees for the platform complementors, so these third parties that operate on top of the platform, when they need to undertake an activity that is similar to an activity that the own platform, the very same platform, undertakes. It can give less rights to appropriate data than the platform owner has in relation to the activity that takes place on the platform, and a range of other restrictions. I think that all these restrictions, in a way, can be seen together as a common thread, in the sense that they all lead to a differential treatment compared to the platform orchestrator. So in a way, when we see all this list of prohibitions that are being imposed by legislation, we can all sum up those in one simple term, is that we need equitable interoperability. So when we say equitable interoperability, it's not just about technical interoperability, but which refers to the ability to interconnect with the platform, but also the ability to operate on equal terms. So receive the same treatment, not just being able to interconnect. And so this is the remedy, and this is the second point that I want to make. It's in this context of share value creation, we need to think about how to implement a feasible remedy of equitable interoperability. And there are, I think, two theoretical questions that need to be addressed in order to make this feasible. First of all, what is the core module of the platform, and what are the add-on features that lie at the periphery? Because these add-on features are those to which competitors need to be given equal access. So when we think, for example, about Google, we can ask ourselves whether Google Shopping and Google Flights are an add-on feature or are a key feature of the Google services itself. Or similar question can be asked when we look at, Instagram and the stories feature. Is this something essential to the Instagram functionality, or is something that we should provide third-party access to? So this is a question that needs to be answered in order to implement a feasible, equitable interoperability remedy. And I think the answer should lie somewhere close to the importance of that feature for the ecosystem value creation. So to the extent that that feature is necessary for the creation of value within the ecosystem, then it should be considered a key feature of the platform and should not be given equitable access to that feature. The second important point is the justification. When you have a differentiated treatment, this differentiated treatment might have a very legitimate reason for existing. So what kind of reasons do we allow to be given as a justification is a key element that needs to be resolved, in our conversation on digital markets, to define where to draw the line. I think that here we should be differential to the value creation by the orchestrator. And so we should not interfere with the business model unless we have the proof to say that this business model is leading to overall welfare decrease for the whole ecosystem. So for example, if we think about e-commerce and platforms that make a ranking, Amazon, for example, in a case has been investigated because it gives ranking also subject to the adoption of most favored nation clauses. So what does it mean? I would lower ranking lower in the results hotels or third parties that do not accept to have the equal price on the platform and outside of the platform. This might be a legitimate reason for ensuring that there is no free riding within the ecosystem. But at the same time, we need to consider also the effect on third parties, on workers, on society overall. So this is something that, in line with the objective of this conference, should be considered also as part of the ecosystem welfare analysis. Finally, third point, I think when it comes to defining whether the justification is legitimate or not, we need to have an entity that decides over these claims. And here it's not feasible really for the competition authority to evaluate one by one the justification for differential treatment on all possible platforms. So here the framework that I would propose is to have a self-regulation or sort of co-regulation framework where the platform agree to have a third-party independent adjudicator that can look into claims that are submitted by private parties that are affected by the platform rules. And so this would not lead to litigation. It will lead to a third party examining, whenever triggered by these private complaints, whether the reason is indeed legitimate. I think this also can lead to solutions that are shared within the industry. So we don't need to have one adjudicator that is contracted every time by a different party, but we can have joint bodies that are adopted, for example, in the context of e-commerce or some specific ecosystems that have shared characteristics. And finally, so how would it work in this framework? We need to have a notice, what I would call a notice and explanation procedure. So whenever a third party feels affected by the rules of the platform in a differential manner, they should notify the platform, receive an explanation by the platform of why this differential treatment is being given. And then if they're not satisfied, they can go to this third-party adjudicator to resolve the dispute. Now, this presupposes that we have also clear rules about what constitutes a reasonable explanation for a conduct and what is the transparency that is given over the conditions of the platform activities. So here we have interesting a guidance by the European Commission on ranking that can be looked at as a model, I think. Here, they, for example, suggest that the criteria that are selected to provide explanation, to provide transparency over ranking, they have to be the most useful for the consumers. So if you are, again, in the context of e-commerce, that is one that I'm familiar with, if you rank products on the basis of the speed of delivery. That's a sensible criteria that consumers are interested in, and it can be in certain markets even more important than price. You would not need to necessarily give priority to one or another. You could leave the users to choose between these different criteria, but the default should be in favor of something that has been proven to be of interest to consumers. And then when it comes to what type of explanation can be given, I think there are at least 4 ways to do that. First, you can detail what kind of factors can influence the ranking, or the outcome. The second one is, what are the characteristics of firms that have received similar treatment to mine? So I want to know what are the other platforms that have received this treatment, other complementors that have received this treatment. Or another one is, what kind of situation or case has received a similar treatment? I'm wrapping up. Finally, a sensitivity-based explanation is, what changes in my inputs would lead to a different outcome in the decision. So this shows that there is a need for transparency and explanation guidelines. The EU regulation is a good step in that regard. We looked at this in Brazil because there are many marketplaces that operate in Europe that need to respect these guidelines. And in principle, they could export this to Brazil, for example. But we have seen that the majority of the global companies only apply these conditions to the European framework. So this is one suggestion, that we can perhaps adopt similar regulation. That would be a first step, instead of going all the way towards a DMA type of approach. The first step is bringing more transparency. Then we can have a solution that involves the adjudication by an independent third party. And only if this framework is not sufficient, proves not to be sufficient, then we can think about the introduction of additional measures. In addition to that, just an additional complication is that when we talk about data access, this framework for ranking might not be entirely suitable. So we need also some type of reporting with regard to how data are being treated, what kind of data, and regular reporting by the platforms over this kind of treatment. So I think that overall, this is what I wanted to say. We don't need necessarily full-style DMA-style regulation, but we can go step by step.
Thank you, Nicola. That was very clear and precise. We now have Ariadne Pletakis, Senior Program Officer, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who is with us virtually. Inclusive digital finance is one of the pillars for inclusive digital economy. Competition concern in digital finance services can have adverse effects on inclusiveness. What are the competition issues in digital finance services, and what are your prescriptions for developing economies? To you, Ariadne.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me. I sent some slides. Would they be available, or do you want me to share from my laptop? Should I share?
Have the slides? Please go ahead and share your slides.
Thank you very much. So today I'm actually going to give you a little bit of
can you just, okay, it's perfect. Yes, go ahead, good. Sorry.
So, very nice to meet you. Sorry I can't be there in person, but hello from London. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a different perspective. I'm going to talk about competition issues, but I'm not going to be talking about competition authorities, not really. So let's get on to the next slide. What I want to, yes, so what I work in is, so I work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I focus, I'm part of a team that calls Financial Services for the Poor. So we focus on enabling low-income individuals to access affordable and suitable products in emerging markets. And I have the portfolio that is focused on regulation. So I work on enabling regulatory frameworks for exactly the same purpose. We work in certain focus markets. India is actually one of them. We have 8 other focus markets. And I guess today I was invited because I used to be a competition lawyer. I am recovering. and now I'm using sort of the work I have done in competition, plus the work I've done for the last 20 years in financial services regulation and financial inclusion to present you a little bit about what work we're doing at the foundation, and maybe could open some interesting questions for you. So I actually did some sort of case studies and reviewed some research and so forth. It seems that competition isn't just about creating efficiency in markets. It can actually unlock financial inclusion. And by what I mean by financial inclusion, I mean financial access and usage by the global poor. Now, in a lot of digital financial service markets, so these are the markets that what I would say is about retail payments, it could be about insurance, securities, it can also include wholesale payments to a certain extent, banking services, and the sort of types of advisory services that are around. This is the markets I'm talking about, right? There are actually a lot of competition issues in developed and developing markets. So part of the reason I'm sure you're aware is that there are steep barriers to entry in these markets. That's due to network effects, economies of scale, high sunken costs, their high operation costs. And a lot of this has to do with very high regulatory requirements, which from a central bank perspective are required because we want to keep financial integrity, we want to keep financial stability. These are the, some of the main objectives of the central bank, right? And we also want to protect the consumers. However, what we've seen is because of this, most of the markets that I've looked at are very concentrated. And a lot of times there's basically 2 types of markets I've seen, 2 typologies. Either you're going to have a market where you're going to have a set of incumbent banks that may compete between themselves, but they're not very incentivized to go beyond their habitual clientele, which are going to be urban people. And they're not very interested in the rural parts of the country, in the people that we're trying to access, the sort of the unbanked and the underbanked. Or you might find a second version is where there'll have been one sort of big entrant, like a mobile money player. So we will be entering and we'll be competing with the banks, but then that entrant becomes a dominant position. And so an example of that could be sort of like M-Pesa in Kenya, but we see this also in Ghana with MTN. We've seen this in Uganda, where we actually have 2 very big, it's Airtel, MTN. So this is a profile that we see a lot, for example, in Africa. So either, incumbent banks that have a lot of power, or incumbent banks plus, mobile network operators that come in. What happens is that because they're not really incentivized to cater to the people, at least that we're interested in, they're underserved, and there's a lot, there's often not the suitable prices, and there's also very high pricing. And so on the right side of the slide, you can see a little bit how these dominant players basically prevent emergence of competition, either in the payment space or in the credit space. So this relates to either dominating the actual, market for customers and making it difficult for them to switch. It's dominating in the data. So this also about data asymmetries, right? And also it also relates to the control of the infrastructure, like the payment infrastructure. And this, especially if there's an incumbent or a couple of incumbents that are controlling this, can prevent entry by what we call DFS players, which are usually types of fintechs, right? But they don't have to be just, depends how you define fintech, but they can be different types of payment institutions, but they can also be other more specialized entrants that work on credit, for example, or just insurance or robo advising. And then on the bottom of the slide, the first talk was sort of about when banks are incumbent, but you can also have similar issues when you have a mobile network operator that dominates, especially the mobile money part of the market. So you can get things, and this relates then to the vertical supply chain that the mobile network operator is integrated to. So you can have that operator can refuse to supply to other competitors. It can refuse to interoperate with other providers. providers, it could self-preference, you can restrict access to infrastructure that it controls. I'm sure this is all sort of familiar to you. The next slide, please. So what I want to bring out is that I know that this forum has been looking a lot at the role of competition authorities, but I do actually think central banks and payments regulators actually do have a role to play as well in how this competition landscape plays out. And to the left, I set out some of the traditional types of either objectives or regulatory actions that these regulators would take in a market. And having looked at, if you look at these tools, the regulatory tools in themselves and these objectives can be considered neutral. But the way you implement them actually has an effect on your market. And you can either have a synergy with competition or you can have a tension of competition. And that's when we're talking about the objectives like financial stability, consumer protection, financial inclusion, also financial integrity. And at the same time, if the regulatory levers that they use, right, to regulate their sector can either have a pro-competition approach or can actually have a chilling effect on competition. So let me give you a couple of examples of this so that this is clear. For example, the regulator can often just determine who's going to have access to a payment scheme, right? They could either decide that, both established and new players can access the scheme. They can have like a type of participant governance to ensure that all the users, their needs are fulfilled and catered to. And there can be basically, interoperability standards that whoever is qualified, if they have the right requirements, can therefore, access and use. And that way you have a pro-competition way of implementing the access to payment system. But you can implement it just in a slightly different way. You're going to have a chill on it. And basically you can say, actually, the only access is to established players, or I'm going to have the whole governance controlled by the established players.
Can you wrap up? Sorry, can you wrap up in 30 seconds? We're running behind schedule. Would that be possible?
Well,
yeah, 1 minute.
I don't think I'm going to get to the end of my point, but so what I'm saying is that it's not just competition authorities that are going to be involved in setting the landscape in digital financial services. Regulators have a very important role to play. And in some cases, I didn't get to the slide, they may actually be better suited because they're able to intervene much earlier than competition authorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a shame we are running behind schedule because this is very interesting. So maybe if Gus would be able to share the slides afterwards, that would be very nice. I will now appeal to the leniency of Cuts because it's already time for a break, but we still have one speaker. Vinitesh Kumar from Fiji, who will be speaking on the Fiji experience on digital platform and competition. I would request you to be very brief and very quick so that people can break for tea. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. I hope you can hear me and see my screen. Yeah, thank you. I'll be brief in my presentation. You have already heard from my colleague about FCCC, about Fiji and the organization that we are from. Just briefly on FCCC's role on the ICT infrastructure, on the digital platform is we do promote competition, consumer protection. We do have pricing tariff for regulations and also for licensing as one of the features for FCCC. E-commerce in Fiji in 2023, the revenue from the e-commerce market in Fiji was projected to reach US 178 million, showcasing a significant growth in the digital economy. For Fiji, actually, our digital platform in e-commerce is fairly new and relatively new. As the colleagues have shared and talked about competition, legislation and all, we are yet to go there. We are yet to be in the forefront of things into the digital market. While COVID has really pushed us into digital transformation, and but still we are adopting to the new to the e-commerce sector and the digital platforms. For FCCC, we have set a self-regulating guideline for e-commerce in Fiji, which is designed to guide all the business and consumers buying and selling goods and services. The reason why we have done this because in our country, in Fiji, we don't have regulations or competition regulations that bind the digital market. All the digital platforms in Fiji, basically we use all the social media apps. The Facebook users in Fiji is around 661,000, around that. And digital transformation in Fiji is perceived as social economic enabler. And Fiji has recently launched a digital Fiji program. And to that, recently India has actually joined Fiji in terms of this India and Fiji digital partnership. So with this platform, the government is actually looking into digitalizing government services and having more platforms. In Fiji, we are more of cash, but recently we've moved to mobile money, which is becoming a widely used payment method for buying and selling of goods and money transfer in our country. Digital markets in Fiji, digital platforms in Fiji still is in its infancy in all small economies in Fiji, where markets are still developing. Technologies in our country are starting to play a very huge role. But however, we are seeing a lot of issues coming out of on digital platforms. Currently, Fiji is buffered with e-commerce, with online scams to the digital platform, through the to the scams, to our mobile money. We are lost. Our consumers has actually lost around $1.7 to $2 million from the online platform that we have. And Fiji being a small economy, this digital platform through these scams to the digital platform has really affected the consumers, and that's where FCCC was brought into play. And now, at the moment, as we speak, we are developing regulations around the digital platforms in the country, and we can adopt to that. In Fiji, we also have a national cyber security strategy that was recently launched to replace 2015 cybersecurity strategy in Fiji. This Cybercrime Act 2021 provides a robust legal framework to tackle cybercrime, and it also ensures protection and secure digital environment. Aligns with the global cybersecurity standards as well. The reason why we have the national cybersecurity strategy is because it has a fundamental of safeguarding digital economy, as well. That's where the country is heading towards, and promotes trust and safety in digital platforms. Towards a thriving digital economy in our country, national e-commerce strategy, FCCC is also part of developing a national e-commerce strategy. This is ongoing development. It aims to boost the e-commerce sector and all the other digital platforms that currently is in the country. In terms of internet connectivity expansion, Southern Cross Next cable significantly enhanced Fiji's internet connectivity as a digital economic growth, and definitely it has an impact, better connectivity, and fosters e-commerce through digital platforms. Digital inclusion and access, infrastructure development. FCCC Fiji collaborate with relevant stakeholders such as government and telecom companies. As I mentioned,
can you wrap up in 30 seconds?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Digital platform and competition, challenges to competition in digital realm include digital monopolies and data privacy issues in the country. And through our FCCC Act, we only have one part in our Act that prescribes trade practices that are considered restrictive and has potential to diminish competition. But however, Fiji is not up there in terms of digital laws and all. And major challenges for smaller countries like Fiji, balancing innovation and competition, addressing cross-border issues, keeping pace with the technology and advancements, and ensuring fair and transparent algorithms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether we have time to allow one or two questions. Please, if your question or remark is very, very pertinent, then please go ahead. Otherwise, you'll have the opportunity to ask the question. I have a list of questions, in fact, but I'm not going to ask them, but you can ask our panelists during the coffee break. Is there any pertinent remarks or questions that we can allow?
Do you listen to me? Yeah, do you hear me? No, just I would like to give a very
nice appreciation very briefly to Professor Zingales, because also being a professor was very able to understand the point, just theory, but just as well a pragmatic view of the idea. So that's very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank all the panelists. I think it was a very, very interesting discussion. It's just a shame that we didn't have enough time to speak more about the different subjects. Hopefully, Kurt will organize the conference where you can all intervene. So thank you very much. And I hope you'll be able to answer questions during the tea break. Thank you.